blindness seems to be that whatever our activity, the tension towards the objective or the content of the activity that we call the what of the activity creates a narrow attentional tunnel which conceals the activity itself, the how. For example, while giving this presentation right now, I'm absorbed into the content of the ideas I'm trying to express, but I'm not fully aware of the rapid succession of inner images, slight emotions, which accompany my talk, nor of the pre-verbal thread of thinking that guides my expression, on which I rely, not even of the gestures I make while talking, little gestures with my right hand. So, even as fundamental and pervasive experiences as our bodily and sensory experiences largely escapes us. For example, when the sound occurs, my attention instantaneously focuses on the physical object at the origin of the sound. In a fraction of a second, I recognize the sound of a bird in the garden, leaving myself, forgetting in a way my immediate experience of this sound. And surprisingly, we are not even aware that we are unaware of something. On the contrary, we believe that we do know. That is to say, the representation of our experience is superimposed on our actual experience. And this contributes to disconnect us from our experience, these representations we have. So the scientific article which I've contributed the most to discredit spontaneous descriptions of experience is an article by Nisbet and Wilson, published in 1977, very well known because it is almost it is the most cited in human science, almost 17,000 citations today. I checked yesterday. So the two researchers draw from a series of experimental studies the conclusion that we have no introspective access to our cognitive processes. The Swedish team of cognitive scientists recently tried to challenge these conclusions through the following experiment. The experimenter shows the participants two pictures of women's faces and asks them to choose which one they find the most attractive. Immediately after, he shows the selected picture again and asks the person, why did you choose this one? But in some cases, the picture which is represented is the one that was not chosen. And very surprisingly, the participants detect the trick in only 20% of cases. And in 80% of cases, they provide an explanation for the choice they didn't make. This result seems to confirm that we have no introspective access to our choice processes, and by extension to all our cognitive processes, and to our experience in general. So we decided to reproduce this experiment, but introduced for some choices between the moment of the choice and the moment the subjects are shown the wrong picture, a micro-phenomenological interview where people are helped to describe their choice processes through neutral and precise questions by a skilled interviewer. And here are our results. The colored part corresponds to the rate of detection of the trick. In the trials where subjects did not undergo the interview, there, our results are similar to those of Johansson. However, in the trials where subjects were assisted in the description of their choice, they detected the trick in 80% of cases. The second important result is that unguided participants even when they are not fooled, only provide scanty descriptions, such as, I chose this one because she had a nice smile. While guided participants, so this means that they remain focused on the what of their experience, that is the chosen phase or unchosen phase. While guided participants provide very detailed descriptions of how they choose. For example, the chronology of exploration of the phases, or fleeting inner images which were evoked by the pictures, or subtle inner feelings which were used as choice criteria. So they describe the choice process instead of being only focused on the content, the result of the choice. So these results confirm that naive descriptions of our cognitive processes are usually poor and unrelated. But they show that guided participants do something special, perform specific acts, which enable them to access their inner experience, and therefore to detect the manipulation. No, it was not this one that I chose. So what do they do, these persons, to access their experience? So I would like to give you a taste of this act by inviting you to participate in a little experiment, if you agree. So take your time, here and now, to imagine a natural landscape that you like, a natural landscape, a landscape in the countryside. And you can close your eyes if you wish, and please raise your hand when you have got this landscape. Thank you. So you can keep your eyes closed to answer innerly a few questions. Which landscape was it? Was it an imaginary landscape or a landscape that you had seen before? To which part of the world does it belong? When you saw this landscape, what did you see? What were the elements of this landscape? Were there any colors in that landscape? Which colors? How was the light of this? Now, what was your point of view on that landscape? Did you see it as if it was a photograph or a film? Or were you inside the landscape? For those of you who saw a photograph or a film, where did you see it? At the top, at the bottom, to the right, to the left? How far away was this image or film? How big was it? For those of you who were inside the landscape, were you seeing it out of your own eyes or from elsewhere in the landscape? And in that case, could you see yourself watching the landscape? Was the visual scene accompanied by any sounds, by any smells, by any tactile sensations? Now, take the time to retrieve that scene. What is it like to be in that landscape or to see it? How is its particular atmosphere? What does this landscape do to you? Do you feel anything, even very subtly? If so, what kind of feeling is this feeling? Is it located somewhere? Does this feeling have an expansion, a volume, particular texture? Now, I invite you to turn your attention towards the unfolding of this experience that you lived 3 minutes ago. From the moment I invited you to imagine the landscape until the moment you raised your hand. This took a few seconds. What happened during these few seconds? Was the final landscape preceded by other candidate landscapes? Did the final landscape appear at once, complete, or was it progressively constituted? In this last case, which sensory dimension appeared first? Was it the visual, or maybe the auditory, or the tactile, or the olfactory, or maybe the feeling of the landscape, or anything else? Finally, when precisely did you know that you were imagining a landscape and raised your hand? What was your criterion? Okay, thank you for participating in this little experiment, which is not a micro-phenomenological interview, because it is a sort of collective interview. The micro-phenomenological interview is very different, because we don't have, as an interviewer, predefined questions, but we rely for asking a question on what the subject, the interviewed person, had just said. So it is a very interactive interview, which was not the case, of course, in this collective interview. So I forgot to invite you to leave that landscape and come back here and now in this room. I hope you did it spontaneously. I have one last question. What did you do internally to answer my questions? What did you do? So we could spend a moment exploring this experience, and what did you do to answer the questions? But as we don't have time, I will answer for you, and or try to guess what you did. And I assume that the first thing you did to answer my questions was to call back your experience of imagining this landscape. You have to call it back. What else can you do? So this inner act, consisting of retrieving or evoking the past experience, is the first act that we have to do in order to become aware of it and describe it. Evoking the past experience is a very specific process, which falls within a type of memory which has not been studied very much, and that the phenomenologist Edmund Husserl called passive memory. Indeed, we are always in the process of memorizing what we live, but most of the time involuntarily, without being aware of memorizing. For example, right now, you are not voluntarily memorizing the color of the wall, the sound of my voice, or which one is on your left, which one is on your right. You don't do that. But tonight or in a week, maybe a month, you could be able to remember this. May I ask you what was your first thought when you woke up this morning? What was your first thought? So it could take us a moment to answer the question, but I suppose that you didn't voluntarily memorize your first thought, but you may be able to recall this experience and make this information reappear. So, in the same way, to answer my questions about your imaginary landscape, you were able to reenact your experience of imagining this landscape. Although little studied, passive memory is a very, very pervasive and fundamental process in our lives. According to Husserl, it is passive memory which explains the feeling that we have to stay the main person, of staying the same person over time. And when passive memory disappears, there is no subjectivity anymore, and so social life becomes impossible as well, and life becomes impossible. All our actions and thinking is based on this process of passive memory, which astonishingly has been little studied. So then, through my questions, I tried to help you perform another inner act, loosening your absorption into the root of your experience to become aware of how it appeared to you. I tried to progressively help you reorient your attention from the content of the landscape, the element of the landscape, to something more intimate, somehow closer to you, your experience of that landscape, and the temporal unfolding of this experience, which may have been partly recognized at the initial moment of imagining the landscape. And what does this reorientation of attention from the what to the how consist in? So in Occidental psychology, it has been called introspection. Introspection. You are supposed to reorient your attention from the external world to look inside yourself. However, the word introspection is extremely misleading. First, because becoming aware of one's experience does not consist in distancing oneself from it to observe it, but on the contrary, in reducing the distance, in coming closer to it. It's not a matter of splitting oneself into two images in order to look at one's experience, but on the contrary of coming into close contact with it. And this contact doesn't consist in stretching towards experience to scrutinize it, to recognize it, but it consists in letting oneself be touched by our experience, be impregnated by it. It's like when you smell a perfume, you do not tense your nose towards the perfume like this, towards the rose, but you relax and you make your body receptive to it. It's very different. So, coming into contact with our experience is more like this, sort of receptive process. Coming into contact with one's experience doesn't consist either in diverting one's attention from the external object towards an inner world, to introspect. Because when we free ourselves from our absorption into the object, to explore experience itself. So the separation, which we usually perceive between inner and an outer world, dissolves. And I'm going to come back to this later. So performing these acts of evocation and loosening of attention is a skill which can be learned. But these acts may also be triggered and accompanied through relevant prompts and questions in the context of an interview, such as the micro-phenomenological interview. To give you an idea, here is a short excerpt of the interview. I read it. If you agree, I would like you to come back to the moment where I asked you, take your time to imagine a natural landscape that you like. What happened then? At that moment, the thought I had in my head vanished. How did it vanish? Was it instantaneous or gradual? It was very quick, but it nevertheless took a moment. And what happened during this moment? I loosen my tension on that thought. And when you loosen your tension on that thought, what do you loosen? In fact, I loosen a light tension in my head. Where exactly is this light tension in your head? It's at the top to the right and at the front of the head. And when you loosen it, how do you go about it? What do you do? And so on. So as you can notice, the questions of the interviewer are content-free, we say, content-free. They are limited to drawing the interviewee's attention to the various moments of the experience without suggesting any content. For example, what happened first? What happened then? What happened during this moment? Very neutral questions. Another key question consists in questioning the verbs of action used by the interviewee. For example, when she says, I loosen a tension, the interviewer asks, when you loosen this tension, what do you loosen? Or when you loosen this tension, what do you do? So these questions are at the same time very precise, very focused, but non-inductive, because completely empty of content. They help the interviewee stabilize attention on a subtle inner gesture. And they help provide a precise description, but without the interviewer does this through these neutral questions without infiltrating his own presupposition. And the question, the final question, how do you know that your attention is now loosened? Draw the interviewee's attention towards very implicit criteria of accurate realization of this micro-gesture. The slowing down of the verbal flow, the presence of hesitations and silences, co-verbal gestures, the use of the present tense, that is, you can see then the interviewer begins to use the present tense. All these are clues that the interviewee is not reciting ready-made knowledge, but is discovering until now unrecognized processes. So, micro-phenomenological interviews have an iterative structure, which consists in helping the subject to evoke the experience to be described several times, while guiding their attention towards a diachronic match, which is finer and finer. And the resulting descriptions are very fine-grained. To give you an idea, the average length of an interview is 1 hour to describe a few seconds, only a few seconds of experience. So, the micro-phenomenological interview is an adaptation of the entretien d'explicitation created by the French psychologist Pierre Vermeersch. The method was initially developed to help persons engaged in professional practices to become aware of the implicit part of their experience and transfer of their actions, in fact, and transfer their expertise. The very first studies concerned the memorization of musical scores and the expertise of nuclear power plant supervisors. So very far from what we do now, but it's like that. And the method has also been used in French schools for educational purposes. On the instigation of Francisco Varela, this interview method has been adapted to the domain of cognitive science to describe experiences, to describe any type of experience. It has been complemented, so this interview method has been complemented on the one hand by a method for analyzing micro-phenomenological descriptions and detect possible generic patterns, and on the other hand, by a method for assessing the reliability of these descriptions and patterns, structures, as we call them. So this micro-phenomenological microscope that micro-phenomenology is, so this psychological microscope, has been used and is being used to study lived experience in many domains. So I would just like to give you a few examples. It has been used to study the experience of learning mathematics, the experience of emerging of mathematical ideas, the experience of listening to music, the experience of selecting a fabric in clothing design, experience of synesthesia, the famous rubber and illusion that some of you probably know, the experience of surprise. Carlos is studying the experience of risky decision making in managers. So the experience of pain, the experience of epileptic seizures, the experience triggered by DMT, more or less like LSD, the experience of architectural spaces. What do we live when we enter a church or a museum or any place? The experience of meeting a tree in a forest, the experience of love, the experience of pregnancy, and the experience of giving birth. And also Lucille presently she did interviews with women from La Sierra de Puebla on their experience of seeing the future together, imagining the future together. So, and I think she's getting very interesting results. So, interviews has also been used to provide very, very fine-grained description of meditative experiences and seem to be very useful for meditation practitioners as well as for meditation teachers. And finally, micro-phenomenological interviews are used to identify the correlates, the neural correlates of, the experiential correlates of neural activity in so-called neurophenomenological projects. But the method extended far behind the search for correlations. She's used just to study experiments and identify generic structures. And this is my next point. So, micro-phenomenological analysis. So, the main principle of a micro-phenomenological interview is to focus on a singular experience. You don't ask people, how do you experience surprise in general? You have to focus on a very specific experience of surprise, situated in space and time. However, this focus doesn't mean that the method is limited to only describing individual token of experience. Each time we analyze the corpus of micro-phenomenological descriptions, we have the surprise to discover generic patterns. This means that beyond the infinitely varying content of singular experiences, the method makes it possible to identify generic characteristics, which constitute the structure of the experience under study. So, this analysis consists in identifying, on the one hand, the diachronic structure of the experience under study, and on the other hand, its synchronic structure. So, the diachronic structure of the experience corresponds to its unfolding in time, as a succession of moments, roughly represented by this rectangle, very roughly. And the synchronic structure associated with one moment of experience corresponds to the characteristics of the experience at a specific moment. For example, the sensory modalities, that are experienced at that moment, or the emotional tone characterizing this moment. So we could compare the diachronic dimension to a movie and the synchronic dimension to a freeze frame. So I'll skip this one. I will conclude this presentation of the micro-phenomenological method by noticing that the emergence of a generic structure for a corpus of description provided by different subjects, especially when the experience under study has been little studied, and there are no pre-established categories to describe it. For example, this emergence of a generic structure is a strong intersubjective clue of the reliability of the descriptions. For example, when you the DMT experience or the experience of being pregnant has not been studied. So there is no pre-established vocabulary about that. And when you gather interviews, very precise interviews of these experiences, and see emerging from them a generic structure, it's a strong clue of the reliability of these interviews, these descriptions. Moreover, the detection of such structures has an important epistemological consequence. Indeed, once detected by a research team, a generic structure constitutes a hypothesis likely to be validated or invalidated by the work of other teams. Experiential structures are thus results which are reproducible and therefore verifiable and falsifiable, which is the kingpin of any scientific validation. So this means that first-person research has the potential to become a scientific discipline, not less. So now, which experiential structures does micro-phenomenology enable us to discover? Releasing our usual absorption into the content of experience enables us to become aware of the usually invisible microgenesis of this content, such as the microgenesis of a choice, or that of an inner image that we began to explore, but also the microgenesis of a thought, of an emotion, of a memory, of an illusion, of a perception, etc. So, amazingly, this microgenesis unfolds in a dimension where the structures that we usually consider as the most solid and the most essential to our experience seem to vanish. In other words, experience is not at all what we think it is. So we began to identify three types of vanishing structures. The separation we think we live between body and thought, between inner and outer space, and between sensory modalities. I will focus on the first two. So first, the collection of meticulous descriptions of the emergence of ideas shows that in the experience of ideation, the distinction that we believe we perceive between our mind and our lived body dissolves. According to many testimonies, before an idea is expressed in verbal, mathematical, or pictorial or musical form, it appears in the form of a direction, a sort of movement, a subtle rhythm, not pertaining to any particular sensory modality. It's not really something visual nor auditory, but it's nevertheless such a fact. For instance, Einstein described the emergence of his main idea as follows. He said, "For all these years, there was a feeling of direction, of heading straight for something concrete. It's of course very difficult to express this feeling in words, but I had it in a sort of overview, and in a certain way visually, in a certain way." So the subtle feeling associated with an emerging idea is characterized by a texture, contrast of density and intensity, which are completely specific to this idea. It would be very different from another one. And even when the idea has been expressed, this gestural and quivering dimension remains. Beneath concept, it constitutes the very dimension of meaning. It is anchoring in this first dimension, which makes a thought or spoken word embodied and alive. So, in other words, when we release the fixation of attention of the content of a thought to explore its microgenesis, we don't experience the distinction between body and mind. We don't. So, now, the careful exploration of the dimension of experience where this border between mind and body dissolves shows that it is not located somewhere in an individual and private inner space, separated from the exterior space by a rigid border. It's easier to become aware of this aspect when the tension towards the object releases, especially in very simple perceptive processes. For example, when a sound occurs, our immediate reaction usually consists in focusing on the physical event at the origin of the sound. So I recognize the sound as the song of the bird in the garden. And this focused attention has an impact of the structure of my lived space. The object is out there, far from me who am here. And this mode of listening creates a distance, a separation between the perceived object and the perceiving subject. But when a sound occurs, instead of going in search of the sound, listening out towards it, I can also make myself be receptive to it, letting the sound come to me, letting myself be touched by it. And listening like this, a little as when we listen to music, creates a sort of rhythmic attunement between bodily space and exterior space, which has the effect of softening the limit between both. So I wanted to give you another example, but no time for this. So in sum, when loosening tensions that cut us off from our experience, we come into contact with it, we don't find a mind, the body, and its environment. These words are abstractions, concepts that veil the reality of what we live. And this leads me to explore the hypothesis that these separations between mind and body, body inside and out, external space, are not given. They are not given, but they are created by micro-acts, micro-tensions. For example, from moment to moment, micro-tensions create and maintain the feeling of a boundary between an interior and an exterior space, which gives me the feeling of being a self, distinct from the world. And the more rigid this boundary becomes, the more solid the objects become, the more my existence as an I is confirmed. Said differently, while Aviva explores carefully the dissolution of bodily boundaries, I'm trying to explore the process of creation of these boundaries through very subtle micro acts. And this project amounts to investigate the process of co-constitution of me and the world that Francisco Varela called inaction. But most of the arguments in favor of inaction are usually drawn from artificial intelligence, neuroscience, developmental psychology, the theory of evolution, immunology, or cognitive linguistics, not from very precise first-person descriptions. Instead, micro-phenomenology explores this process of co-constitution of the subjective and objective poles through in our lived experience. And to conclude, I would like to say a few words on what drives me to devote much time to try to develop micro-phenomenology. My motivation comes from the conviction that the loss of contact with our lived experience has dramatic existential and societal consequences. Indeed, the split between an interior space and an exterior space has the effect of depriving both of life, of disanimating them. Outside space, the non-human environment is perceived as an indifferent and inert space, filled with objects intended to be possessed and exploited. We ourselves have lost contact with the vibrant dimension of meaning because of this separation of inner and outer space. Our life is often reduced to the exhausting and compulsive quest for confirmation of our existence by the acquisition of objects, which leads to the death and the ecological ravage that we know. Because the weaker we become, the more we try to satisfy ourselves with frantic consumption, and the more we exhaust the earth. As defended by ecopsychology, this experiential starvation is the very condition for the survival of our current economic system, which strives to maintain it by many means that we could identify. So I consider the anchoring in lived experience as an act of resistance. Because in this situation, the precondition to solve the inextricable ecological and societal problems we meet today is to regain contact with the felt dimension of our experience that gives meaning to our life. I have the conviction that only this contact can free us from the compulsive need to acquire objects in order to confirm our own existence, and give us the courage to stop this consuming process, and the courage to live in a more sober, dignified way. So, within all human activities, it is thus urgent to create joyful spaces of resistance. Spaces where, together, we allow ourselves to slow down. It's not this, I'm saying something similar. So, joyful spaces of resistance. Spaces where, together, we allow ourselves to slow down, to breathe, to listen to the felt dimension that animate our life, to let new visions and new stories emerge from it, to imagine new ways of doing things, demonstrate here and now that these new ways are possible. So thank you for your attention. Do you have any questions? Is this done? Oh, that's all.
Yes.
I'll take your word.
¿Está prendido los micrófonos? No, nada más tenemos la entrada de la... bueno. Well, thank you very much. Now we'll open the floor for questions.
How would you apply these methods to the art of seeing artworks in the museum in terms of another experience, and how would you connect your experience to the artist? Yeah, yes, something separate two different occurs. And everyone self-separate. And so this is like now studying the sense not of object, but of moving space. Looking an object. It could be a past experience that you lived in the past, maybe last month or last year, or
Tienes que quitar el de ella y poner esto. ¿Quieres que hagamos eso? Ahorita yo creo que después hay que quitarlo.
Return of the artist is another experience, which is where you are also to identify very specific moments. Because painting, yeah. The artist may have spent maybe a week or a month on the painting. So you have to identify with him or her specific moments which were significant in this process of painting and explore them. And I know another micro-phenomenologist who is doing something very special. He tries to explore this process of painting, in fact. As a researcher, he is beside the painter, and he asks him to paint. And he interrupts the artist regularly to ask him, what did you do? What did you just do? So, of course, in agreement with the artist, who accepts to be interrupted from time to time. So this gives access to some slices of experience. And it seems that he has very interesting results, because you are able to stop the person and help her reorient her attention to very subtle emotions or inner images, or that she just had without being aware of having them, because you stop the process. So it's a way, it's a technique that we can use sometimes to access experience.
Thank you so much. I really, really loved your. You were talking about the passive memory that you described. And is it related to the episodic memory?
No. Yes and no. Because episodic memory, yes, it is related to it in the sense that episodic memory is usually passive memory. It has been in fact, remember. You are able to remember, to retrieve a moment that you have memorized passively. But what is not, it is related. But this process of passive memory, what do we do in the initial moment to be able to memorize without any awareness of memorizing something that we can remember afterwards? Is not, to my knowledge, very, very precisely studied. And for Husserl, tried to do that, and he relied on this structure of retention and protension. So it would be too long to explain this. We can have a conversation on that. But he said that we retain our experience, the past experience that we have, the very so for example, to be able to understand one of my sentences, you have to retain the beginning somewhere and to be able to understand the whole sentence. So it is a process of retention. And this is the basic process of passive memory. You're not voluntarily retained. It happens like that, and it gives you the possibility to understand. Husserl, in fact, take the example of music, a piece of music. You can only listen to music if you have the memory of the first notes. If you were listening notes after notes, it wouldn't be music. So it would be something. It would be notes. So yeah. So it is how he explains passive memory. He relies on the process of retention.
Maybe you leave other people last and then at the end I have to.
Okay. Thank you very much for this very refreshing and moving talk. So I see for myself several lessons that you give us. Because you're talking about paying attention to the how, right? And not only the what or how versus what. And I think that's very, very enriching. Also, that experience and phenomenology is not misconception. I think that's also important to point out because there's a lot of confusion about that. And then talking about the separation, right, between the outside world and the inner world. And I think it's very interesting how you cast, this in terms of like a continuum, right? Somehow a continuum between the outside and the inside. And experience. I mean, for me, what I really appreciate the most is it's an invitation to re-explore and to discover what experience is. Because experience is presupposed in any study that we do, right? About whatever. And sometimes, or very often, in philosophy at least, we over-intellectualize, experience, and we have it become like an idea or a concept. But then, what you're telling us is that we have to rediscover experience, sort of not in the beyond, not dans le au-delà, mais dans le en-deçà, right? It's not going outside, but going inside. So my question is, do you think that meditation or what other techniques other than meditation are available, do you think, for getting a grip on what experience is truly is, Is meditation, I think, a good tool, but is there any other, I mean, of course, micro-phenomenology, but something that we can do, at home or anytime in our lives that you would recommend?
I would say, yeah. What can we do to become more aware of our experience? I think the real big tools, very powerful tools that I see are of course, as you said, meditation and micro-phenomenology. It's not bad to have already two good tools. It's already so, because a few decades ago, none of them were used or even known in our Occidental world, at least. So it's already a huge progress to have these tools and be able to develop them and compare them, because they follow more or less the same structure. What what else can we do? Just slow down and go in the forest and and be attentive to experience changes subtly but very strongly in a way, and be attentive to what happens then.
I read that even paying attention to what we eat and just savoring,
Mm-hmm.
tasting, it would make people less obese, because you get satisfied and satiated, with the flavors of the food, right? So just paying attention to that experience, right, of eating, and have very useful consequences, very practical. Just one example.
Yeah, it's a very good example. Paying attention to anything, but we are so in a hurry that we don't. We are focused on the what, the objective, the object. What can we get? And we have to slow down, and it is really very difficult. But I make a difference between the techniques which can help us as researchers to collect descriptions, because we need, as researchers, descriptions. So there are some techniques which can help us become aware of our experience, such as meditation, or maybe being attentive to our experience in many domains. But this doesn't help us to describe it. As researchers, we need a description in order then to try to identify generic structures. And so micro-phenomenology and such techniques are well adapted to that for research. Yeah.
In relation with the academia acceptance of this methodology, I can imagine that it has been an evolution in that kind of conversation, or opening a conversation in more scenarios like this one. And since you begin with this, working with this, and now it has happened a lot of things. And could you share a little bit about what do you think for the future for us, that we are intending to use this methodology for further researching processes?
I think that you can expect, as a young micro-phenomenologist, many demands, because you have to be very good one, become a very big good one. I'm not saying that you're not, but you have to really to practice, because there is a huge interest in this method, and it can, it's my conviction, but it proves to be not only a conviction. It can help us understand our experience in many domains in very different ways, and discover things that we completely ignore. Completely. So it's but to do that, you have to be a good micro-phenomenologist, to practice interview, the analysis, to practice meditation as well, because these two techniques are very complementary, and also to go in the forest and eat and take care of what you eat and do all this, because you are. My feeling is that micro-phenomenologists will have much work. It's my case. I cannot. There are so many invitations and solicitations that I cannot do this myself. So I want to rely on you, micro-phenomenologists, and the important thing is to become a good one, because this method is not easy. You cannot learn it in a day, or by reading a book, of by in a week of training, it's really a little like meditation. You have to practice this very regularly to become a strong and very precise researcher in that domain. So I don't know if I answer your question.
It's a very small question, and I'm sorry if I missed it. Why is it called micro?
Micro, because it enables you as a researcher to collect very, very fine-grained description. So it's micro-phenomenology, but sometimes micro-phenomenology stays at the general level, more general than what we access. And as I said, an interview of 1 hour usually describes only a few seconds of experience, maybe 1, 2, 3 seconds, which means that the 3 seconds will be explored very, very precisely. And this is where we discover pre-reflective and unrecognized thing, because we think that, oh, in this second, what happens? Nothing. No. And in fact, it's amazing what we can discover in 2 seconds of experience. Thank you. Thank you.
Has this been done, or can you do a microphenomenological interview with persons with attention problems?
I don't know. I never tried. Really, it has not been tried, to my knowledge. So, because yes, the interview requires really a focused attention, focused, not focused. I said that it was not focused, but stable attention, which is helped by the interviewer. The interviewer plays this role of enveloping the experience of the other and help him or her staying with the experience. But I don't know. I cannot answer your question.
Can it have like therapeutic potential in that regard, like helping people to improve their attention, like in the therapeutic setting?
Maybe, I don't know. It has to be tried. I'm not sure it would be the best tool, the best technique to help people stabilize their attention, because maybe there are more easily accessible tools, many. But why not? It might be a good idea. Yeah.
Well, let's thank the talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll take a little break while next symposium gets ready, so that we can start catching up with the